Welcome to Round Hill Radio. Through our conversations, we discover the holy and the ordinary, look for moments of grace and peace, and we define what we talk about. We talk about faith. Good morning, Ed.
Good morning, Leslie.
How you doing?
So far, so good.
We're back at it.
We're at it.
Another week. And so let's dive into our reading. It is week 11. I had to check.
Amazing.
We're still hanging out in the land of Matthew, as I called it the other day. So this week is from the book of Matthew, as I just said, chapter 6, verses 5 through 15. So here we go. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him. This, then, is how you pray, how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven, as we have also been, for crying out loud, as we also have forgiven our debtors. It's not like I say it every week or anything.
Right.
And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. For if you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. Okay, well, despite my bumbling and stumbling, we made it through. So the Lord's Prayer.
The Lord's Prayer
is what we're talking about this week. This is our topic, I'm assuming. So many questions. First off, how did we get the end? Because I know some traditions sort of stop at deliver us from, right? And then we here at Round Hill Community Churches, I know a lot of Protestant denominations also say, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever.
Right.
And so do you know the history of how that got added on?
So it's a theological statement, right? So
Okay.
we're ascribing honor, power, and glory to God. And yeah, so as we see the original, it starts with, it's basically lead us not into temptation, right? But deliver us from evil. And we add this statement has been added, I think, again, to make claims about the one to whom the prayer is being addressed.
I see.
And so it's interesting because some traditions do not always use that ending, and so they stop a little bit, sooner. But I've been thinking about these words, for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory. It feels like those words would have worked just perfectly if Jesus had used them as well, because they're really words that are designed to say to Rome, you're not it.
Yeah.
Right? The ultimate power, honor, and glory do not belong to you,
Right.
neither to the emperor, to the imperial political system, to any of it. So in some ways it feels like feels even more political than the rest of the prayer in that sense, right? It's designed to subvert this whole idea of imperial systems. So.
Well, that's really interesting. Yeah, it's sort of that. Do we know? I mean, I'm just digging into this in my own personal edition of Stump Ed. Has it been around? Has that edition been around for a long time? Do we know?
It has, but I can't tell you exactly when it was added. So I don't know the answer to that question. So that's a genuine Stump Ed question for sure. But we can do a little digging on that and find out. But
I'll bring it up on our Instagram live stream.
There we go. Give me a chance to recover.
You have 48 hours.
I like it. The countdown begins.
I love it. And so it's interesting too, because I feel like in every translation, every version of the Bible, obviously they're going to translate it a little differently.
Yes.
And then we also have, what modern Christianity has sort of taught it to us had. We rock the thys, thy kingdom come, thy will be done.
Yep.
I've also heard, which I think is fun, there's actually a setting the choir is going to do where kingdom is
Oh,
kingdom.
kingdom, yes. And that's a relatively new, right? I mean,
Yeah.
when I say relatively, it's probably been something, it's been some language that's been used, I'd say over the last 20, 25 years. So that idea of kinship is emphasized, right? The kingdom is not a hierarchical political structure that's just nicer and kinder than what Rome put on the table,
Right.
but it's actually a way of relationships, kinships, kingdom. And by the way, I think that it's never quite taken because not many churches use it
Right.
at all.
Right.
But nevertheless, it's out there, and it's sometimes it pops up in hymns. So I like the idea behind it, though, because Jesus is really focusing on brothers, sisters, familial language quite often, and kinship is all about that. Kingdom feels more political, royal hierarchy.
Sure.
Yep.
Sure. In the way that we zoomed out last week that I really enjoyed, can I zoom out a little bit
Sure.
about this too?
You're on a roll.
Apparently. So Jesus in this translation refers to God as Father.
Yes. Yep.
You can see where I'm heading with this.
Keep going.
Was the words that we think he used, obviously, we don't know for sure, but is it a gendered word like that, or is it more general than that, and the gendered comes in the translation?
So great question. And it is a gendered word.
Okay.
So it's really Abba.
Okay.
Is the word. And I think the thing that's missed here is that the word father doesn't really communicate what Abba means.
Okay.
So Jesus, was growing up in a culture that also used Aramaic. So there's some differences between Aramaic language and Hebrew. But in the word Abba, it's a familiar term, super familiar term, more like Papa. And so when we use the word father, that feels pretty formal.
Yeah.
And it's not what most people use, right, in our culture.
Right.
So in this case, Abba suggests a really high level of trust, intimacy. It's more the kind of word that a child might use, I think.
So we're going like full dada.
I think so.
Yeah, or like pa, or like
There
dad,
you
just
go.
like dad, or
Yes.
like,
Yeah, and I think that's
those.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And I think that's the association that we want.
that
Right.
affection.
Father can feel distant, right? And it's almost like a title.
Right.
So, but it's interesting how and this is the new. So we're using the New International Version. We're giving a lot of different versions right through this.
Yeah.
But it's interesting how this still stays pretty formal. Now, my guess is that in the latter stages of this, the word is pater. So that's the Greek word for father.
Okay.
And that is a more accurate translation, but that is a gender-specific term.
Okay.
But I think what Jesus is doing here, though, is he's maybe subtly undermining this notion of patriarchal authority, right? Trying to bring a different level of warmth into the mixture here. I think that's what he's doing.
I like that. And again, that sort of political thing of like, well, we have an emperor situation or
Right.
king or this king, but here's an Abba.
Right.
And right. And like, here's an authority figure that is as cloaked in warmth as it is in power.
Exactly. May I go a hard right?
Oh yeah.
So if you add to that your earlier question about for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, right? That what Jesus, so that is, by the way, is called a doxological comment.
Yeah.
Right? Cool. So that's where you are ascribing praise and excitement and your loyalty, right, to God.
Got it.
And so if you combine the Abba idea with that so-called doxological comment, right, you're bringing together these worlds of warmth and also something that, as one member of our congregation used to love this word, transcendence, right? Something that's bigger than everything is being combined with something that's incredibly familiar.
Right.
I love that idea.
And close to us.
And close to us, right? So that's all happening in this prayer.
So much is happening.
A lot is happening.
It makes sense. It sort of stood the test of time.
Right?
Right. If it was like one thing people know, it's going to be this.
If there's only one prayer you ever say, if there's only one prayer you ever learn, this is it.
Right.
John Dominic Crossan, who's a name we've batted around before, he calls this Christianity's greatest prayer. In fact, I think the title of his book is Our Greatest Prayer. And he outlines very specifically how every element in this prayer is so important. Every piece is essential. But again, it's that, I hadn't really thought about this till you asked these questions, but it's about that warmth and that transcendence. Keep the two together.
The micro and the macro.
Yep.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. So earlier in the passage, Jesus is like, don't be out there praying in the streets.
I should have told that to the gentleman who was praying the other week when I was walking through Times Square.
Oh, there you go.
Who was definitely causing quite a fuss.
I gotta tell you, where I used to live down south, there was this guy on the street corner every Saturday with like big signs. I mean, like 6x6 signs, and had, I think if he had 2, he had 20, and then he had a boom box.
Yep.
And it was like, street corner isn't really descriptive enough because there was like a big grassy area.
Okay.
And he just took the whole grassy area.
Well, if you're going to do it.
He went big. He went really big.
Do it big.
So Jesus is not recommending that.
He really is not.
And he's like, I love, go into your room, shut the door.
Right.
I love the shut your door.
I know.
That's my favorite part. Like, no. Close the door.
I have to tell you, how many people had doors, 2,000 years ago living in Palestine?
Fair point.
By the way, since we mentioned this, this is a little bit of an interesting indication. What is the audience of this text?
And did they have doors?
Because we very frequently associate Jesus with an impoverished audience.
Sure.
Right. These are people who live in Palestine. They have all kinds of health issues and, food scarcity, food insecurity. They don't have any there's no such even concept of saving anything, right? Any of that. And yet, a lot of the material in the Gospels, especially in Luke, is addressed to people you would think they're pretty well off. And so this has this little undercurrent here, what exactly does he mean by door? And is there something that's true to the culture that's not actually communicated very well in the translation by the word door, but we don't know what that would be. Right. But I think the point here is, get away, step back. And there's a very long tradition in the Bible. It's an interesting thread that runs through those books of people who actually do step way out of the main line. Right. So here Jesus is saying, well, not everybody can do that. Not everybody's going out to the desert or living in a ravine or whatever. So he's saying, you're going to have to find ravine time where you live. Right. That's got to be somewhere in your domicile. And again, we're not talking about big houses. No. Right? So we're talking about very modest arrangements. And yet, nevertheless, if it's true that the gospel according to Matthew was written, let's say, 50 or 60 years after Jesus died, which I think most scholars would say that it was, maybe even later than that, well, maybe it's actually connecting to an audience of people who are a little better situated in Roman society. Because clearly Christian growth will happen because it appealed in some sense to people who had resources, especially women who were overseeing households where there were servants, because those servants also became Christian. And so that's how that's one of the reasons why the movement spread so rapidly. Yeah. So anyway, it all comes from the comment of this word door, right? So I could be making a whole lot about this that I really shouldn't be doing. But I like this idea. Close the door and pray to your Father who is unseen. Now, why do we have to be reminded of that? Yeah. It's a beautifully curious moment, right? He's unseen. I actually love that phrase. This is the elusive mystery. But guess what? If you close your door, you can talk to him. Yeah. Again, transcendent, but call him Papa. Right. I think the biblical writers seem very much inclined, although they were writing over hundreds of years and most didn't know one another, they like the push and pull of the very close and the very far. And I think that's reflected in this passage.
Do you know, just this morning I was watching an Instagram reel about someone strategies for storytelling. And he was saying use the macro and the micro in storytelling of these big swaths and then details and then big swaths.
Pull people
and
in
details.
and then scope it out.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So, literally this morning.
Wow.
It's so funny that there is that.
Well, and I guess, right, it's a very successful storytelling technique that's been around for thousands of years.
Yeah.
So we get all that incredible little detail. Yeah. And I guess even when you think about epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey, they do the same thing, right? We get to see the spear and how it's made, and then also, and by the way, here's what the gods are up to, right? So it pulls us back out.
Yeah.
And I think that's what is happening here, really. I just have to say one other thing. When pray to your Father who is unseen, then your Father who sees.
Right.
So the unseen one is seeing.
Yeah. It's a little like the Santa, he sees you when you're sleeping. Which only this year occurred to me. It's a little creepy.
It is a little creepy, yeah. Exactly.
But there is that kind of idea of like, he is unseen, but he sees you.
Right. And that's supposed to be compassionate here.
Right. It's supposed to be comforting.
It's supposed to be a good thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's good. Well, you think about times in our lives probably when you've said, are you really seeing me right now?
Yeah.
Are you really hearing what I'm saying right now?
Yeah.
And I think that's what's going on here. I have to say, I'm also fond of this translation because do not keep on babbling like pagans. I mean, I don't know what that's supposed to sound like.
I didn't know pagans were prone to babble.
I didn't either, but clearly, as the Christian movement is growing, there are a lot of people out there who have a lot of different styles of prayer, and they use different languages and probably body postures and places. And you know what? Don't be like them. It's a lot easier than you think. Just get inside.
I will say
close the curtain.
Then you get to the ultimate, I would say probably the ultimate comfort sentence, which for me is, for your Father knows what you need before you ask him.
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
He knows.
Yeah.
Still ask, but he knows.
It makes me think. So here's what's very challenging, let us say, about reading the Bible is that we see Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, those four portraits of Jesus. Well, we think those must have been written very early, right? Those are like the biographies. And then you get a lot of other material in the New Testament, mostly letters written from St. Paul. Yeah, that must have come way down the road. No, it's exactly the opposite. Everything that was written by St. Paul was written probably within a decade, plus minus, a little bit more than that, after Jesus died. Very soon thereafter. The Gospels are written 30, 60, 80 years after. So the biographies are coming way down. Yeah. Right? So what's interesting is that there is a passage in one of Paul's letters where he says the Spirit knows how to pray for us. And it's a beautiful line, and we often use it in memorial services. It says, the Spirit prays for us with sighs or groans even deeper than words. So the connection for me between that passage and this one is that here's your Father who already knows what you need. So there's this knowing that happens, right? Again, super intimacy, I guess is the best word to describe it, where God has that kind of knowing about our personal fragility or vulnerability. And yet there's this Spirit, which is unseen, undefined, right? Bigger than everything. And but not so transcendent that it doesn't know how to read us. I think that's a part of this. It's interesting. So was that passage, that passage from Paul was probably floating around for a while. Yeah. And it's included here. Now, did he pick that up from words that, that someone had said, this is what Jesus had said, so he picks it up and writes about it. Then it gets reflected back in Matthew's gospel. It's really interesting, all those connections.
It's funny, I just picture when you were saying that, you sort of go into your, I sort of picture like a quiet corner, right? You find your quiet corner God's there. God knows what you need before you're even asking. And then the Spirit is there to sort of envelop you in this warmth and comfort and sort of like this little quiet moment. But Paul, to go back to your letter thing about Paul, because Paul was kind of late to the party, right? In terms of, because Paul was Saul, right?
That's right. So, yep, he was part of the movement that was persecuting the followers of Jesus. So that's soon after Jesus dies, right? There's this attempt, according to Saul, to kind of squelch this Christian movement, and then he has an epiphany. He has a revelation where he encounters Jesus, and that changes his life, changes his name, gives him a whole new career. And so yes, he does come late in that sense. You know,
he wasn't like, you know, because you think of Paul because there's so many buildings named Paul.
Yeah, but he wasn't part of the original team.
Right. Yeah.
And he wasn't even part of the team really that kind of gathered after that. He's like another 10, 15, 20 years down the road. Yep.
So interesting.
Yeah.
It's really interesting that all these, you know, these time periods, to put them in sort of, you know, context of like, okay, how long ago would that be for now? How long ahead? And like thinking about, you know, when I need to remember something, obviously I have the memory of a goldfish. But, you know, I have photos and, you know, I guess they had letters, but it's sort of interesting to be like, think about how much is accurate. Again, she's mumbling on the podcast, guys, saying stuff that might get her in trouble. But it's like, it's a little like, oh, okay.
Well, and the versions don't all line up.
Right.
So there's an issue right there.
Yeah.
I think to your question though about, you know, so what do you do when you have these stories and you're concerned about how they get passed along? One thing here is there's a prayer, right? That if people can't remember a lot of things, because they also think, my memory's not so good. What was that story you told?
Yeah.
However, our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. You know, once that gets into the memory bank, that stays, right? And this is a very oral culture at this time.
Sure.
Right? Most people are not able to read and write, so they have to learn stories by repetition. And, you know, I think that having this prayer early on, so this is early on in Jesus' ministry, as Matthew describes it, he's going to make sure that they have this prayer. And there is a little bit of jealousy or something going on in the background of this, because when John the Baptist, who's Jesus' cousin, comes on to the scene, there's a lot of material that suggests that he had his own thing going on. And he was popular. He was odd.
A little eccentric.
In an attractive sort of way, I guess. And his clothing was designed to help to sort of inspire people to think about Elijah. He wore the same kind of clothing deliberately, camel's hair, you know, ate locusts and wild honey, not your normal diet probably.
Probably not.
Went out to the desert, all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So but then it's very clear that there's this little tension going on between. And so Jesus' disciples come to him at one point in one of these versions, and they say, you know, just saying, John taught his disciples how to pray. So, you know, I mean, maybe that's not important.
Maybe something to consider.
Maybe I shouldn't have been asking that question, but I'm just, you know. And so the next thing you know, we've got some teachings on prayer.
There we go.
It's kind of like, you know, pastors, they hear about the wonderful educational series down at the Third Methodist Church, you know, in downtown, and you think, yeah, I guess we better do something like that up here too.
I guess
that's
what we're doing now. It was the TikTok trends of early Christianity.
There
is what you're saying.
Exactly. So we wind up, you know, getting this amazing prayer, which, as you say, has stood the test of time.
Yeah.
Right? If people only know this prayer, this is an extraordinary. It contains so much information. You know, we talk about how important information is in families, you know, share information. There's a lot of information that's being shared in this little prayer.
Can I go back to Stump Ed?
You sure can.
We're renaming
it's easy
Ask
apparently
Ed
today.
as Stump Ed. So, trespasses.
Trespasses.
Debts.
Yes. And yep.
Sins.
Yep.
Is that the third one?
Yeah.
So for those who have not gone church hopping, there are different translations for forgive us our blankety blank as we forgive those who blankety blank against us.
Yes.
And sometimes it's debts, which if you're Presbyterian, that's how you roll.
Right.
Which always makes me laugh because we Scots like to hold on to our pennies. And trespasses.
Yeah.
And sometimes sins. So what's up with that?
I think that, and I'm going to have to check this, but I think that the word debtor is the one that's probably the closest. And I think that so the word sin, that's the one that I really don't quite understand how that fits in. But I think that it's interesting that both, the word trespasses is interesting. It's just that it's about ownership, right? And boundaries.
And overstepping.
And yeah, exactly. And so I guess when I'm thinking about this, each of these words carries such a different meaning.
Yeah.
Right? And how is it? So it's fun to find out in the local traditions how they choose which church, decides to do which.
Right.
Because I worshiped for many years in a church that really wanted to use the word sins because someone years ago had thought he had done a translation of that and the church adopted that. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, it's, I'm not sure I'm helping very much here.
No, this is very interesting.
But it's almost, it tells a lot about the theological interests of the church is what I would say.
Yeah. It says more about us than about the nature of God.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and it is that sentence is about how we interact with one another more than actually how we interact with God. It's asking to be forgiving and receive forgiveness from each other, actually.
Right. I would say this about whichever word we wind up using. It seems like the generative direction here is that he's really aiming for this quality of forgiveness because a little bit earlier he's told us, we have to love our enemies. Right. And so I know he apparently is not going to let it go and then he puts, there's a really sharp comment at the close of this. If you forgive other people when they sin against you, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you do not forgive others their sins, your Father will not forgive your sins. So what happened to unconditional love? Right? There's a sense here that God, I would say, leaves us in the place where we are. And waits for us to come out. And God's not going to force the forgiveness upon us, but it's not just going to be automatic. We're going to have to do something to release ourselves and others from that feeling that we have towards them. So I guess what this is saying is God's going to wait for us. It's not just going to be a reaction. So I think that's very powerful. And that passage will come up again later in the gospel when Jesus will give instructions to his disciples to say, whatever sins you retain, whatever sins you forgive are forgiven, whatever sins you retain are retained. So again, it puts a lot of weight on the community to be a community of forgiveness, but they have to make some choices about how they do that.
That's tough. That's tough to hear.
It is. I mean, they are really, especially because virtually the last thing that Jesus says before he dies is, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, which I've often thought, it's he at that point, I'm not sure that he has it in him. I mean, who could certainly wonder why, right? He may not have it in him at that moment to offer forgiveness, but he thinks that God can. So he turns the whole matter back over to God. So in a way, here we are back in the quiet space. It's just him and God. And he said, this is really what I'm hoping that you will do, which is extraordinary. But that's how he ends his life, by essentially holding out hope for someone else.
It's powerful.
It is indeed.
It's also in this section that we're reading, it's also like he's kind of doubling down on it. He's like, no, that thing I meant about forgiving. Yeah, no, I really meant that.
Right. Yeah. It's coming back. And it's going to continue to happen because we're not going to be looking at all of them, but if you read through the whole Sermon on the Mount, which is chapters 5, 6, and 7, the Gospel according to Matthew, he's going to continue to find ways of showing us how judgmental we can be. As if we needed
As
reminders.
if that's difficult.
Kind of comes naturally, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Really good at it.
But he will keep moving along those lines. And I think people struggle with this question in terms of how do I, is there a line that I need to hold in terms of a moral, my own moral stature in the world, or is there a center that I need to occupy for that? And how do I maintain that? How do I forgive people when they've hurt, if they've hurt us so badly? Have I given up too much of myself? We're always asking those questions despite what Jesus said, and they are, again, we have so many powerful examples of people who have reached out into forgiveness to other people. You can barely imagine how it happened, but there it is. We have that capacity, and he's appealing to that capacity in us. Even here, he's saying that you have this power, and he's embedded it right in the Lord's Prayer.
Yeah.
By the way, I had a friend of mine who was a youth group teacher for a while. And she had this pretty big youth group. When she taught them the Lord's Prayer, she used to take them outside and have them scream it.
Oh, nice.
Right?
The opposite of go in the room and hide.
Totally opposite. Yep. But she said, you know what? We're going to push this in the other direction. And she said, I want you to feel what it feels like when you are basically screaming it like a demand.
Yeah.
And she said that it was always, they just found that the most amazing, liberating experience.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Very cathartic, I would imagine.
I think so.
Shake your fist at the heavens.
Right? And just, we're all in this together. But these comments in the Lord's Prayer, they are not questions.
Yeah.
Right? It is, hallowed be your name, your kingdom come, your will be done. Give us today, forgive us. It's lead us. It's all very direct commands.
Yeah.
So that's interesting in and of itself. This is how we are being taught to talk with God. That in that directive, bold kind of way. And there's no, well, please, if you get around to it, I've always been struck by that in the Lord's Prayer, just how directive it is, bold.
Okay, no, this is a long episode, but I have to ask this question. So
you already stumped me twice. Come on.
No, I'm really, sorry. Apologies in advance.
It's the Trinity now.
Yeah, no, you have to do things in threes. So why do some traditions prefer, I'm phrasing this, trying to be very respectful. Why do some traditions prefer to pray through saints, for example, or Mary? Why, when we're seeing in this, obviously you can't pick and choose bits of the Bible to make a point, but we're seeing pray directly to God, and we're seeing others that prefer a middleman friend.
Oh, I have an answer to that.
Yeah, right. Okay, good. I was hoping so. I imagined you would.
That's probably not a good answer, but it is an answer. I think what some traditions are doing is they are simply expanding the number of doors through which one can pass on the way into holiness. So the more, in other words, you pray directly to God, but you may also feel a special kinship with a saint. A man, a woman, maybe it's even a community of saints. And they function for you like the ones who can help you, accompany you on your journey to God. Okay. And I read this comment, which I thought of when you were just asking your question. It's actually a beautiful little book in German about angels. I've been looking at this recently. And there's a beautiful quotation in it from actually someone who was a Holocaust survivor. And this woman said, better no world at all than a world without angels. So I think about the saints as being like these angels, And it increases your ability to connect with the transcendent. And I think, what it's also like saying, some people may feel like, I'm not sure that I can bring this prayer to God. God is unseen. God is mystery. Yes, God sees me and apparently knows my needs, but I don't know how to connect with that. But St. Francis, I kind of get him. Mary, I can't identify with her, but I can see the example that she brings. Is this making sense?
Sure.
And I think that you then, again, it's like one door opens and another door opens and another door opens. And you've given yourself all of this different kind of access. And it's like these people or angels in Christian tradition bring you along with them. You're part of what is it? The great company of saints, right? Great cloud of witnesses. And you're part of that. And I think some people find a lot of comfort in that. Where I've encountered this in some ways is in hospice houses. So I had an experience of working, not in, but somewhat alongside a hospice house for a time in New Hampshire. And when I used to meet some of the residents who were there spending their their last weeks or months, it was really remarkable to see the various symbols that they used and artwork that they used, and sometimes I think the saints that they called upon in order to accompany them on their journey. And I think that there's some of that in this tradition, which is why, and some traditions have simply said, go for it.
Yeah.
Right? We're going to open it right up. And in other traditions, it's God alone. Right? There's nobody else. Through Jesus, through faith, that's the access point. There's only one. It's very narrow, and you have to pass through that gate. Other traditions have said that's not so. It makes me think a lot about this comment that I heard from a New Testament scholar some years ago. And he said, it's better to speak of many Christianities than only one. That it's not that they are fundamentally different from one another, but in their core beliefs, but the infrastructure is different, and in this style of Christianity, and that's a word that some spiritual directors use deliberately. What's your style of prayer? I think we're learning Jesus' style of prayer here. But some traditions have a different style of prayer, right? And it might be more open air. With others, it could vary tremendously.
Yeah.
And so that's a very long answer to your question. I'm not sure that it gets at it, but I think that is why access is provided for through all these other different means.
I think I have a metaphor for it from what I just learned from you. So say you're having a tough time and you have a great relationship with your parent, a really positive relationship. You can tell them anything, but maybe you're feeling nervous about it, or maybe you just really screwed up. Right? So what you're going to do first, you're going to tell your sibling about it.
There you go.
And be like, can you come with me to go tell them? Because would you come hold my hand?
That's a wonderful, I love that analogy. St. Francis, come in here.
Come here.
We got some things to say.
I was around an Anglo-Catholic church for a while, and I will say I did adopt the practice of, I believe it is St. Christopher.
Yes.
Of lost things.
Yes.
I'll tell you, help me out.
Okay.
From time, I was like, sometimes I would just be like, all right, fine. Thanks, man. That's all I got to say.
I think it's almost like a friendship level.
Yeah.
Right? That this is a person who really is a friend. I love you, but I love your analogy. I can really, if it's really bad, I'm going to go there first. Then we'll go together.
Yeah. Get off my chest, and then
Yeah.
Bared it out. Let's go tell mom or dad.
Right. I love it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So fun. But this also makes me think now we really need to have an episode about angels, because now I'm really curious about all that.
We must.
Yeah.
We must.
Okay. You guys have to let us know if you're into that, if that sounds fun. Like the video.
We're ready
for that. If we can maybe get enough, we'll make a whole special about angels.
That'd be great.
I'll sing that ridiculous Sarah
I'm ready.
McLachlan song. All right. Thank you, one and all. This was a hefty one, but I had to ask the thing about the saints. I'm sorry.
It's
I had
all good.
to. If you made it this far, thank you so much. Drop us a like, a comment, and we will see you back here next week. Roundtail Radio is brought to you by the friends and members of Roundtail Community Church. For more information, please visit roundtailradio.org.
If you enjoyed this podcast, there are a few things that you can do that would make a big difference to us. Like the video, subscribe if you aren't, and click the notification bell and select all. Thank you.